All right. Well, I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamoni, acceptance coach. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories, along with practical tools and actionable insights to guide you along your healing journey. Together, we will be exploring the hidden gifts, lessons, and blessings inside grief and empower you to reclaim your life and create an inspiring future. Today, I have another friend of mine who's an Aussie from down under, who has walked a similar path that I have in life as far as losing a child to stillborn and miscarriage. And so I'm really excited to have her on the show to share that chapter of things because that's oftentimes a part of life that's not very discussed. And so Fiona's going to shed some light on her experience in the nursing field as well as her personal journey going through those things. Fiona is a registered nurse, as well as a midwife and a child and family health nurse. More recently, she started her own business as a pregnancy and parenting consultant and coach. Her passion is empowering families during these significant milestones in people's lives. She also has two children of her own who are her world. Fiona, I just want to say thank you for jumping on the podcast this morning and being open enough and vulnerable enough to share your story. And so without further ado, I'd love to hand over the floor to you.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me on. It's certainly different talking about it in this respect being on the podcast, but I feel that, it's so common. One in five women experience miscarriage, and I just don't think that it's talked about very much, and it needs to be. It's a common part of life that families go through, and especially women who are experiencing miscarriage, and it's about supporting them through their journey because often it's just lost along the way. You're sort of told to get on with it and you'll have another child, all those unhelpful comments. So, yeah, throughout my journey, I've had three miscarriages, but I do have two beautiful children who I'm so grateful for. So, my first miscarriage, well, I first fell pregnant in 2010. So, I was an older mum too because I didn't get married until I was about 34. So, by this time, I was about 36. And the first time trying, I fell pregnant. I was over the moon. I've always wanted to be a mum. And I can still remember the day that, I did the pregnancy test. And I remember my husband at the time, I ran out the backyard and he was mowing the lawn. And I've just got this pregnancy stick going, oh, I'm pregnant. And, it was just, overwhelming joy. You've wanted this for such a long time and it's happened. Um, so yeah, so that was great. And unfortunately, I started bleeding and miscarried when I was about 8 weeks. And that was absolutely devastating for me, especially after wanting a child for so long and it happening so quickly, which was very unexpected. And I felt really alone. I just felt like I was on my own journey and no one else understood. My partner, he wasn't very supportive, but I just don't think he knew how to support me either. He'd obviously never been through it. So, but it was very difficult for me because he was not supportive. So I felt like I was really on my own and no one else understood. So pretty much, it felt like I just had to get on with it. So obviously just went back to work as if nothing had happened. Yeah, everyone's like, yeah, just keep trying again. So 3 months later, I fell pregnant again, which was just amazing as well. And I was excited, but very nervous. Obviously I didn't want to go through what I'd been through with the first miscarriage. But I tried not to let that taint my excitement, and tried to believe that everything was going to be okay. So when I went for my first ultrasound, I was about 7 to 8 weeks, and being nervous, I thought, no, everything's going to be fine. Everything is going to be fine. But when they couldn't find the heartbeat, I remember that gut-wrenching feeling in your heart and in your stomach that your world's just been shattered, pretty much. And I still remember the sonographer just walking out and leaving me there, like to gather my thoughts, and I just didn't know how to feel really. It was just a bit surreal. So, and after that, you just, you get back into it, get in your car, you go home, and yeah, you just sit with it. I found that really, really difficult, and especially telling my family what had happened, because obviously I'd told my close family that I was pregnant. Um, and that just, I felt like a bit of a failure. Um, and I felt like my body had let me down, and I felt like I wasn't good enough. I wasn't good enough to have a child. Um, and throughout, just after this, I didn't, I had to actually go into hospital and have a D&C, which was obviously I didn't miscarry, so I had to have that in hospital, and that was pretty horrific as well, knowing I was going in to theatre and then coming out without my baby. So I felt my mum was up here at the time, and she was with me, so that was great. My mum was very understanding, didn't judge me. She was just there to hold my hand, which was really helpful. And after that, I went home, and that was it. So I really struggled after this. I felt really became really depressed, and in my field working in child and family health, it was really hard because I was working with parents and babies every day. So, women getting pregnant and in the first 2 years of their child's life. So I found this incredibly difficult. So again, it just spiraled into the depression, and it took me a while to realize that I needed some help. So I sought some counseling. My GP recommended some medication, but my husband told me that I didn't need it.
Mm.
So I didn't. I tried not to take any medication, but after 12 months, I needed it. I needed something to help me as well as the counseling. So I went on the antidepressants, and it made a world of difference. So with the antidepressants and the counseling, I began to shift my thought processes into a more future focused instead of past focused, sitting in my grief, and actually feeling as if I can move forward and, be positive about my journey and that I will become a mother. Because I was focused on the negative. I'm not going to be a mum, my body's failing me. And it was just a horrible feeling that I couldn't shake, but I felt like I could get through this now and I could talk about it. So my friends, close friends, I would sit with them and chat with them about how I felt, and they were very understanding most of the time, which was again helpful. But it wasn't until that point where I could really share exactly how I felt and move forward. So not long after that, I fell pregnant, which was oh, it was amazing. After 16 months of trying, after my second miscarriage, I was pregnant. And I still remember the day, I took that test, and oh my gosh, it was just amazing. And yeah, I'll never forget that feeling either. Just that joy of knowing that you were going to be a mum again. And yeah, so I was very excited, but very, very anxious, very anxious. When I went for my first ultrasound, I thought something was wrong. I was shaking. I was so beyond. I wasn't even thinking rationally, I don't think. But I was lucky I had my mum by my side and my auntie at that time. And we went to the ultrasonographer. And I just still remember sitting on that table, just this is it. I'm going to find out whether my baby's alive or my baby's dead, pretty much like. am I going to be a mum? So, you're looking at the screen, and I remember looking, and it was like the longest, seemed like the longest, few seconds of my life. And, and then I saw this heartbeat on the ultrasound, which, again, that feeling of relief, it was insane. You've got one end of the spectrum of pure grief, and then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got pure joy, and experiencing those two emotions not nearly together is just mind blowing. And from then on, obviously, in the early days, I was quite very anxious again that something was going to happen. But then I got through my first trimester and into my second trimester, and I felt great. And, I felt positive. And I think I was that way because I did seek that help before I became pregnant, finally. So, I would be saying to any mums going through the same thing with miscarriage, just don't delay getting help, because it's so important, and to speak about it, because, you did have a child, yes, okay. So maybe only early in your pregnancy, it doesn't matter, whether full term, 6 weeks, it's still those dreams and hopes that get shattered, regardless. So my first child was born in 2012, my gorgeous boy, who's now 12. So it makes me feel old.
That's
Oh,
awesome.
yeah, he's just amazing. And, I'm grateful every day for him. Uh, then I didn't know, because I was 38 when I had Ryan. I didn't know whether I'd have another child. So we did try for a little while, but nothing was happening, and I ended up falling pregnant a few years later. And I still remember the day I found out. It was just amazing. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have a sibling for, my son, and, just those dreams of having two children. And then again, it was around 7 weeks that I began bleeding and miscarried. And I just felt all that grief rush back again. And it was, yeah, it was heartbreaking that, you just don't want to feel that way, because it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. Um, and again, it took me a while to work through that. But I think knowing what worked the second time about talking to people and getting counseling straight away helped me progress through that, I think, a bit quicker. Um, and also the focus that I did have on my son. I think I was, really busy, but it's still, that grief was still sitting with me. Um, but I felt like I had to overcome that before I could fall pregnant again. So I did end up falling pregnant, and had my second child, which was absolute blessing. They're 3 years apart. They fight like cats and dogs, but um, you 1 minute they love each other, the next minute they don't. Um, so yeah, and I was so grateful to be able to have another child, because I didn't think that I would. So every day I count my blessings. Obviously that was my journey to have those, to go through what I did go through. And I think that because it is so common, people really dismiss it. And it's something not to be dismissed, because, that your hopes and dreams get shattered in an instant. And, for everyone, it's very different. But for me, it was, my world collapsed. And I remember going to work and just, after my second miscarriage, I actually did have a bit of a breakdown. I I just could no longer work with parents and babies. I just couldn't do it. It just the grief was immense. And that was around the time I took some time off work, and then I gathered my thoughts, went on medication, got the counseling, and was able to just sit with my grief without having all the day-to-day stuff going on, to be able to get through that. And then eventually when I did that, and I went back to work and got pregnant. But yeah, so it's a different journey for everybody. Um, there are people who just don't understand. And look, that's okay, because if you haven't experienced it or know someone who's experienced it, you don't know what's going on. And it's very hard in any grief situation for people to say, or know what to say. Um,
Yeah.
but one of the most helpful things that one of my friends did say to me was, look, I haven't experienced what you're going through, and I can't even imagine how you're feeling, but I'm here for you.
That's
And
powerful.
yes, and I will never ever forget that. That was a very, it just made me feel like heard. And, it was my journey. And, I didn't want anyone to change that or the way I felt, but I just wanted people to understand and, be there for me, I guess, when I needed it.
I
Mm,
think you hit on quite a few powerful things about this journey around miscarriages and around even stillborns. I went through that stillborn journey of losing my son day before he's supposed to be born, and I can share empathy with you when you hear that news that their heartbeat's not there anymore. It's soul crushing. I mean, there's not really words that can describe how you feel in that moment, because it's just like your whole world collapsed. And a lot of people don't understand that when you go through a miscarriage or you go through a stillbirth, that you didn't just lose this child, you lost your future, you planned for this, and these things you envisioned for your life. And so your whole world literally gets turned upside down in a matter of a second. And that's a lot of very heavy grief and very heavy loss on someone. And I also love that you touched on the fact of what people say to you as you go through this process. My wife and I struggled for 12 years just to get pregnant with the first one, and to lose him to a stillborn was crushing still to this day. Haven't been able to get pregnant since, and that's a really hard thing. I think especially, from a man, it's a little different of a journey from a woman that goes through that process with body changes, emotion changes. There's a lot more that goes on in that path. And I think that, um, another big thing you said is just how people talk about it. I got told shortly after, in my experience, I got told things that were insensitive, like you can always try again, it'll happen again, don't worry about it, or well, at least you make a beautiful baby. And like those things are really hurtful, because
yeah.
it writes off our feelings in those moments. And so I'm really glad that you had a friend there as you went through that experience that could say and just give you space to be heard. And I think that's something a lot of women that do go through this really need. They don't need to be fixed or told what to do or say, oh, it'll happen. They don't need to hear that. What they do want is to be listened and to be seen. And I think creating space for women in that avenue is probably the biggest thing that can make a difference in that healing journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And this friend that did give me that advice, she ended up going through two miscarriages herself. And, and I was able to support her through those as well. Um, which was, I don't even know how to explain that. It's like a communication that between you, that something's not said when you go through these things yourself. And it's like, you both know, you don't even really need to like at times talk about it, because you both understand, you're on the same page, which is that in itself is really powerful. And I guess that's why, if you do, you do meet other people who have been on the same journey as you, um, you know, when people understand, like really understand what you've been through because they've experienced it themselves, is, quite, yeah, you can really, you don't feel alone, I guess. Um, yeah, you don't feel alone, and you don't feel judged because, they've been through it as well. So, yeah, and just sort of touching on my professional journey as well. So I was a midwife for many years. I don't practice as a midwife now, but I worked in that area for a long time. So, I experienced also the joy and the heartbreak of, you know, what that brings as well. So I have worked with parents with, going through labor and birth of their stillborn children, um, and have been through many heartbreaking situations um, in that journey, which, yeah, is absolutely heartbreaking for the parents. And, I feel that I am grateful to be able to, well, I was able to share that journey with them and help them in some way through that as a midwife. So I think with all that experience as well and being on the other end of it, it was, I don't know whether it maybe brought up feelings of that in the past as well, of going through that and yeah, having that feelings of grief for those other people as well. I don't quite know how to explain that, but it's a job that I did because I love the whole concept of pregnancy and birth and, parenting. But when it did happen, like people did lose their child or something happened in labor, it was certainly, yeah, it was really heartbreaking. But, you know, I was there for those parents and I was there for them to, to be able to grieve. And yeah, it's certainly it's I don't even know how to explain it. I don't think I can explain it.
Yeah,
Mm.
I wanted to touch on something you brought up in the process because it's something I've experienced, and I always say those of us that have lost a child, whether that's a miscarriage or a stillborn, it's a club that we don't want to be part of. We didn't want to join, but we're part of it, unfortunately. And I think that one of the most challenging aspects I ran into, and I wanted to get your opinion on this, is
Hmm.
when you do go through that miscarriage, when you go through that stillbirth, you have this array of emotions that go through you all the time, and they're very, very hard emotions. I went through like soul crushing, couldn't speak and find words the day before we delivered him. I just couldn't find a word to describe what was going on or how I felt. It was like being numb or feeling dead inside. And then meeting my son, I was happy. And then when I went home, I was angry and sad.
Mm.
When you went through your miscarriages, I know you talked a little bit about that journey was challenging for 12 months without getting that med from the doctor. I wanted to ask you, when you were going through that emotional time, did you allow yourself permission and space to feel your emotions fully and give yourself permission to feel how you were? Did you, in a sense, try to, tell yourself that, try to talk yourself out of things? I was really curious to get your perspective on, going through those waves of grief can be very challenging. Sometimes they're big, sometimes they're small, but just describe how you were able to work through those emotions and kind of get yourself to a place, like you said, to move forward in that grief journey so that you could have another child. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, and that 12 months was like I felt like a yo-yo. I was, okay 1 minute and then I was down really low the next. It was like, yeah, a roller coaster. Um, and little things would set me off. Just it could be a baby crying or seeing a mother with a baby in a pram at the shops, or, you'd be fine 1 minute and see that and all that, those hopes and crushed dreams that you had just come flooding back. And as much as you try and get on with things, there's always those places you go to or people you see that remind you of what you've lost. And I think particularly in that journey, my partner wasn't very supportive, and couldn't understand why I was feeling the way I was. So I felt really alone in that because I didn't know whether I should be experiencing it or not, or was I abnormal? Or, I had no idea where I was, what I was doing, and whether it was okay. So I think I really judged myself, and I think that made my journey worse. And I truly believe that that inhibited me from becoming pregnant again because I wasn't in the right mindset. Um, so when I think towards going and getting some counseling and going on the medication, I think just I know that with time it does get a bit easier. I mean, but it never, like, that grief never leaves you, but it does get easier to talk about and move on. And I knew that if I stayed in that place, I was not going to have a child. So I knew I had to move forward. I knew I had to change my mindset. I knew I had to just change the way that I perceived things, because if I sat with my grief where I wasn't going anywhere. So I think I might have been around that time. Had a couple of close friends who, were quite worried about me, and I just w- I don't know what it was, but realized that I have to move. If I don't move, I'm just going to stay here and I'm going to be shattered. And that was probably after my bit of breakdown, when I had to leave work for about a month. And also in that time, I went home to my family, who were very, very supportive. My beautiful mum, who just, she's amazing. She went through it herself. So she had a miscarriage, and also I had a brother who was 17 months old who died when I was 5. So I know that my parents went through quite a lot of grief around that space. But yeah, my mum was very, very just sat with me with it, which was amazing. So that gave me the courage, and yeah, I'll call it courage, to move forward and seek more help and go on medication. And I think it just allowed me to expand my mind and open up possibilities. So the possibility of that I can become pregnant again, that I can be a mum. And as soon as that happened, not long after that, I fell pregnant. So I think it's a huge mindset shift. And I think that if you are in that negative space, it really hinders your ability to get what you want, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it does. It's you mentioned being stuck in grief, and I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. I certainly did after going through losing my kid. I struggled with that for a good 2 years after losing him, and I think sometimes we get stuck in grief for many reasons, by the way, and I'm just going to touch on a couple of them.
Hmm.
Sometimes we feel guilt or shame or blame ourselves in that moment, and that's why we stay in that grief space. Is that it's almost like managing I call it the comfortable chaos that we're familiar with. We can manage
Yeah.
that really well, but when we think about the uncertainty of what can bring us happiness, that's almost scary because we haven't been there yet. We haven't experienced that yet. And so I always say grief is kind of this like torn area in the middle of, we're comfortable with the chaos we know, but we're uncertain
Yeah.
about the unfamiliar. And so it's bridging this path is what grief gives us to get to that place of understanding and accepting that unknown and saying that this is
Mm.
a possibility that could happen. And I think
Yeah.
that's a big thing I think a lot of us struggle with. I certainly did myself, and it sounds like you did on your grief journey as well.
Yeah. Thinking about that and what you're saying, it was also my self-talk as well. You know, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough to be a mum. My body's not good enough to carry a child. Yeah, it was all about my self-doubt in my abilities, and I wasn't a good person. You know, God didn't want me to have a child. Um, yeah, it was really negative self-talk. And I think that's what I had to work through to then accept and move on.
Yeah, and that's, I think that's a big challenge too. I noticed I was there for my wife through the whole thing and even after the fact because it was very hard to watch a woman go through that. It's very hard for me. I'm a pretty emotional kind of guy, but um it's hard because like we've discussed about, especially when it comes to bringing life into the world, there's for women, there's such a big body change, biological change, mindset change. Everything's changing constantly before this child even comes to the world, no matter what way they come. And from my experience that I have gone through in that process, I think there it needs to be a lot of support for women through that. I really believe it and I feel it because I have this phrase that I use in coaching that people can empathize to the level of experience they have in their life. And so it's very hard for people that haven't gone through that or experienced that to relate to it or understand it in the capacity in which people like you and I have gone through it will see things. And so,
Mm,
um, I've come to this place too where being a lost parent, I've learned in that community too us men are not even really talked about. We're not, our experiences aren't even discussed. And so it's perpetuating a societal issue from what I see that, I think men sometimes aren't, I'm gonna say they're not emotionally available to show up at times because again, we're not taught how and
absolutely.
we're not seen very well as this other part. When my wife and I got pregnant, we had this big talk about do we have a doctor or do we go with a midwife? And I told my wife, I said, I don't know because I haven't been here before, but I said, I'm going to trust you because you're carrying my son and you know what's best for your body. So I'm going to put that in your hands and say that you're going to make the right call for that because I cared more about her comfort, her safety, her ability to feel good about the process and what she would trust. Because I really felt like if we go down a path with a doctor, whatever reason, we don't trust them or it creates this uncertainty or negative emotion of some kind, that can really cause some stress and problems. And um, I was very grateful we went with a midwife, by the way, because we had a birth doula that was with us for part of the journey. And I remember them saying,
Hmm.
uh, Dad, you're not off the hook. You don't get to just sit on the sidelines and let your wife go through this. That's not how this works. And I was going, well, what do you mean? Like, because
Yeah.
I didn't come from, I'm just going to sit there and do nothing, but I meant like, well, what's my role? Like, what am I supposed to do? And
Mm,
so I got very involved in that entire process. I went to every single ultrasound appointment. I went to every single meeting with the midwife. They told me things to do with my wife to make things easier. And so they said that I thought this was really powerful that when you do get pregnant, it's a joint thing between mom, dad, and baby. That's a big team
yes.
that's required to make that work. And if dad isn't showing up, mom's got a lot of pressure on her. Mom's dealing not just with herself, but with the child too. And so you've got to create that support structure there. And so
Absolutely.
um,
Yeah.
I'm really sorry to hear you didn't have a lot of support from your spouse at the time when you were going through that. I think I've heard that from another woman I interviewed last week. And I feel really terrible for that just because of what I went through. But I've seen that, if we could shed light that us as dads have a role in these things and we have a place that we need to show up and support and having people like midwives or even people like you, the pregnancy coach, somebody like you sharing the importance of that family triangle, that it's mom, dad,
Mm,
and child, and it's a partnership, um,
triad.
a
Yeah.
triad. And I think that's something that, like you said, this happens to 1 in 5 women, so it's not like it's uncommon. It happens.
Mm,
Um, I got told going through my process that 120,000 stillbirths happen every year in the US. And when I thought about that, I said,
yes.
120,000 women go through that every year?
Yeah.
And it's mind blowing to me because
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't hear about it. It's not talked about. Um, my nurses said, yeah, it happens, but outside of that, you just don't hear about these things. So I
Mm,
really think it's great what you're doing as a pregnancy coach. I really think your ability to share your story about having miscarriages and getting that spokesperson of yourself out there to educate people that this does happen and it's not something to
yes.
be, you know, pushed under the carpet for lack of a better term or don't talk about it or pray it doesn't happen. It's something that does happen. And I think that if we raise awareness about it and educate ourselves on why these things happen or how they happen, there's so much we can do in that process to make it a better experience and also minimize the chance of those things happening.
Mm. Oh, absolutely. And, the thing is, it can happen for so many reasons, and sometimes you don't even know. And, but the pressure that parents put on themselves that think that, it was something they did, is huge. Where, matter of fact, it's nothing that they did or nothing that they could do to have prevented it. Um, and I think that that's a big realization. I think when people it can accept that they had nothing to do with it, and it's something that was out of their control. It, it can make it feel a bit different, but everyone's journey is so, so different. And I think we just have to be aware that, what works for one person may not work for another, but just for people to realize that it happens quite frequently, um, and put it out there that it's not something that you don't talk about because it happens. I think we should be talking about it, and that's obviously why I do talk about it because, I have many, many friends that have had miscarriages before, and and able to chat with them and talk with them. And some people don't want to talk, and that's okay. That's, if they want to talk, I'm here. It just really depends on, and everyone grieves differently.
Yes.
So, and where you are in the grief cycle as well. So, you really, but to know that you know, it happens and it's not something that we should hide. It's a part of life, and it's a part of life I think that we have to talk about and accept that it does happen, but support, be supportive. Don't not talk about it or run away. It's here. It's not going away. And the
Yeah.
same with stillbirth and also, the death of a child. I remember when my brother died, I was 5, and I have fleeting memories about that, but I just feel like that was not talked about much, which was as I got older, I had more questions, and it was kind of people just didn't want to talk about it. And I didn't, it brought up more questions. So I think, you know, um, and it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I really began thinking, what actually happened, and
Y-
and and going down on that journey to find out like what really happened to my brother. And, I found that healing as well. And I think that some of the grief too, is really unconscious grief. And, you don't know it's there until something happens and, yeah, it just appears. And I think that, and the thing with grief, you always remember these things. It's not something that you forget about your whole life, like it's with you. And it does change over time, but it never leaves you. So, it's a part of you. It's a part of what shaped you. Like, having those miscarriages has shaped me as the mother I am today. I'm really, really grateful to have 2 healthy, beautiful boys. Um, and I'm forever grateful every day for them in my life because I know my journey to get there was so difficult.
You touched on something that you jogged my memory of things that I wanted to talk about with this topic, but that's something my wife ch was really challenged with and still today is to a degree. But there's always this, I started noticing this in the lost community with a lot of parents I talk to, especially the women that would say, I feel like my body let me down. I feel like my body failed me. I
Yes.
feel like I can't get pregnant again. This is really disappointing when I try, and it doesn't happen. And I see how much pressure women put on themselves in that situation, and something that I was really grateful for. We had a really great doctor at our hospital back in New Hampshire, and this doctor delivered our son, by the way. I don't remember much of it because I was crying in
Yep.
a whole different place in that moment, but um, I still remember her telling my wife after we met with her a couple months after that, and she said, don't beat yourself up about this. The body we can't control. The body is going to do what it's going to do. And
Hmm.
it's hurtful. I'm not saying you can't grieve and be hurt by it because it is very frustrating. It's a very painful thing. But she said, we don't control the body. We just can't. And this is where these things happen and they're tragic. They're very sad. It's very hard to mentally say, how did my body let me down?
Yeah.
And work through that. And so I remember her telling my wife, which I thought was really powerful, is that she said, even in these light of stillbirth, people still go on to have future children. Some people end up just like yourself having miscarriages. They'll have a child, have a miscarriage, have a child. We
Hmm.
can never really predict if that's going to happen or how it's going to happen or when it's going to happen. But she said this, which I thought was really powerful. She said, you've given birth, regardless of the outcome, you've given birth. And so your body knows what to do. Your body now knows the process, it knows how to do this thing. Um, so to say that you can't or it won't happen is really just not giving yourself that opportunity. And it's normal to feel that.
Yes.
It's normal to feel that. I remember her saying these words to us. She said, it's normal for you to feel like it can't and won't happen. It's normal to feel those things. Don't write them off, but also give yourself space to say, my body did this the way it was supposed to, and that's okay. And I know that it's
Yes.
going to happen again. And she said, this is the better way instead of this toxic positivity we hear from people saying, "Oh, it'll happen again," or "Oh,
Mm.
you'll get there." Like instead of saying those things, it's more of like acknowledging yourself and giving yourself credit and permission that your body did what it should have done, regardless of the outcome, and knowing that there's always another opportunity and chance for those things to happen. And I think
Mm.
that, combining that though, your story was really powerful that you shared today, that you went 12 months and had to get counseling and had to have antidepressants. I think utilizing those tools in that situation is perfectly healthy. And it's actually a really, really good thing to be able to put yourself in that place to say, I need help. I just need someone to talk to. I need somebody to give me a different perspective, or maybe I do need meds to help me out. Maybe I do. And like
Yep.
you said, I think the beauty of, especially talking about this topic of miscarriage and stillbirth, is that it's a very individual journey, just like grief. There's no one way that pregnancy happens. This doctor of ours also said, every pregnancy is different. You had a very smooth
Hmm.
pregnancy all the way up to the end, but she said, I met people that had a smooth pregnancy with a boy, they had a rough pregnancy with a girl. And so that she said, I can't sit here and tell you that getting pregnant again is going to be the exact same thing with this next time that it happens. It could be a
Yes.
very different experience. But she said we should celebrate that and appreciate that and understand it because that's just
Mm.
the nature of how this process unfolds. Um, so I
Yeah.
share all that to say that it's a lot of those things are very hard to hear in the moment, which I'm sure you've heard in your process.
Yes,
But it's also
definitely.
a reminder for us to stay in that positive lane, not toxic positivity, but positivity in the sense of giving ourselves opportunity and permission to allow ourselves to do that again and know that we have another chance to make it happen.
Yes. Oh, I totally, totally agree 100% with that. And as you said, everyone's journey is so different. Everyone's, pregnancy journey, birthing journey, like it's, absolutely unique. I've never, like, for example, as a midwife, been to a birth which I can say has been the same. So, they are all completely different. You know, and the thing that I think I loved being as a midwife was being there in the moment with someone at their most vulnerable times in their life and supporting them through that. And for me, that was the most powerful thing being a midwife, is that I was part of their journey, whether it was most of the time positive, but as I said, there were obviously times where, you know, it wasn't great. Like, for example, if, family did have a stillbirth or whatnot, but still, it didn't matter what it was, I was there to support them no matter what. So that's something that, I felt really strongly about. And, being in this kind of field, working with children and families, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I love it. I love supporting families, and I think my experiences have shaped the kind of person, or, professionally as well, who I am. But I also know that everyone's journey is different. So, and it's about sitting with people and letting them share their experience, not being over, like, people who are overpower other people, go, oh, yes, I've experienced that. No, no, I didn't feel like that. Just, you feel like just telling them to shut up
Yeah.
and, just shut, I won't say it, but shut up. You know,
Yeah.
um, this is my journey, not yours. And yes, I see that you've been through that, but, everyone experiences it differently. And I think that appreciating that and accepting that is really, yeah, is really powerful. But I don't think that some people just don't have the capability to be able to do that, or the insight. Um,
Yeah.
and that was like with my um, husband at the time. He just had no insight into how I felt, and it made him uncomfortable. So it made him feel uncomfortable, and he didn't want to talk about it. So, you know, he pretty much, avoided the subject, which again left me alone in my grief, to seek support from other sources. And, sometimes I feel if I had have had that support from him, would I have, gotten through that journey any different? I don't know. I mean, it is what it is now. But, looking back, I think, just support, especially from your significant other, or, your close family, and just not being judgmental is just makes a massive impact. Yeah.
Yeah, I was really glad that we've talked a lot today about how everyone has an individual grief journey, because that's something that I celebrate every day, no matter if it's a client I'm working with or people on my podcast, for example. The reason I have this podcast, by the way, is because I love to hear other people's stories, because there's so much
Mm,
to be learned through everybody's individual grief journey. There was a time after I lost my son that my wife wanted to go to a event that the hospital is throwing together, and it was a lost parent luncheon for 2 hours. And I was really apprehensive at first, because my first goal was like, I don't want to go, because it
mm,
was going to be in a room full of parents that lost stillborns, had miscarriages, and it was just really heavy. And I just said, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know
yeah.
if I'm and I was still pretty raw about losing my son when that happened. And it's really traumatic for me to put myself in those environments. And my wife talked
Yes.
me into it. Um, and when we went, I was very just uncomfortable to talk to people, because I was scared to feel those emotions come up again. Um,
Mm,
and when you were talking about your husband, I can relate on that front, that we're not taught as men how to feel and how to have emotions. We're always told women are the emotional ones. And I have learned on my journey, men, we just weren't taught. That's the problem. We weren't taught. We have all those emotions, we have those
yes.
feelings, but we don't know how to get them out. We don't know how to talk and feel. Um,
Absolutely agree with
and
that. Yeah. Sorry,
and
Chris.
oh, no, you're fine. And what I wanted to say about this event that I thought was powerful, was you touched on this a little bit with what you just said, is I spent 2 hours in a room with 40 different couples who had all had anywhere from a stillborn like I did, to losing two or three children, to losing one of their twins, to having miscarriages like you multiple times over. And I cried a lot that afternoon. It was so thick and heavy of energy in there. But what I also saw in the middle of that experience is that a lot of people like you and a lot of people like me that have gone through this, they made something beautiful out of it. And it turned into, what I saw was a celebration of this child's life. I saw married couples talk about their problems and how they came together. I also saw
Hmm.
people that fell apart from it. I saw this
Yes.
just array of experiences. And so back to your point of everybody's grief journey is individual. I love that you understand that and you celebrate that and you appreciate it because what I learned that day in that room is that we all have something in common. It's not the thing we want, but it's there. Um, but we were able to share our stories and share how we went through that. And I was able to talk to lost dads in that room, and I had found out that many of the men in there, 9 out of 10 of them, don't know how to feel. They don't know how to express emotion. They hold this thing in here and say, I'm okay, I'm fine, I have no problems. And you can just see it in their eyes. You can see it in their
Mm,
body language that they want to just pour out with crying and upset and emotion, sadness. You can see that across their faces. And then when I would look at the women in the group, they were completely vulnerable. It was the most beautiful thing and amazing thing I saw, which is why I've learned to be emotionally vulnerable with this. I saw women that
yeah,
did the heavy lifting, did the birth through that. They put their bodies through it. They went through depression. They went through anxiety issues. They went through an array of things to bring this life in the world. And I thought it was so empowering that they set such a good example of this emotional vulnerability is something that men need to learn. It's not a weakness thing. It doesn't mean you're a soft man. It doesn't mean those things.
100%.
It
I
means
totally
actually the
agree.
opposite, that when you can be a man and be vulnerable, you're strong. You're a strong person
Yep.
to just come out and say, I lost my son and I'm hurt. I'm sad. I'm really frustrated. I'm lost. Like though being raw with those emotions is very powerful.
Yeah, I agree so much. And I think that that's such a huge thing in our society, about men not being, not sharing their grief. It's seen as a weakness. And that's got to change. And exactly as you said, I think showing emotion is stronger than not, and I certainly instill that in my children. It's okay to cry. It's okay to feel sad. It's a part of life and it's normal. I That's probably one thing, because I went through that with my um the children's father, with him not being emotionally available, that I didn't want them, if they, have a relationship later on in their life, not to be able to express themselves because it's unhealthy. And I think that, you've got to be able to do that. And society needs to realize that men, go through the same experiences as women. Like, it doesn't have to be different. Um, they, you know, they lose a child as well, or, and it's okay. And, that support needs to be there for them as well, where a lot of the times it's not. And the focus, especially professionally, is on the woman.
Hmm.
And men, same with like postnatal depression. Men can experience postnatal depression, but it's not, you know, when a family comes in and sees you with their baby, in a clinic, we're not asking the man, like, oh, how you been feeling? What's going on for you? Although I do make that a priority for myself because I know how important it is. But in all the literature and everything, it's about supporting the mother. So, which is, they should be seen as I said before, like a triad, they're together. It's not just mother and baby.
Yeah, I'm really glad you make a focus point on that because that's something that, uh, the only resource I really had when I went through it, to be honest, was a hospital counselor, and I was
Mm,
very grateful that she understood, and she provided minimal support, I'll say that, because it's this idea that I think a lot of people just don't know how to talk to men about that too. By the way, it's just this whole
mm,
complex of things, and I will say this, since one of my biggest things that I share on this podcast when I talk about going through the gifts and the lessons and the blessings of these moments is that you set a really powerful example a minute ago, and you said my spouse wasn't very supportive for me, so I was left alone and isolated on my own to work through this and how scary that is. And then you also at the same breath said, my children I have now, I'm teaching them how to cry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be hurt. It's okay to cry. you're because of that experience you had and that relationship you had, you're now teaching your children, these future grown adults that are going to be, I can just tell, beautiful people in the world from how you talk about them.
Thank
Um,
you.
you're teaching them to be better people that won't go out there and repeat that same thing with somebody later down the road. And I think that
Mm.
that's part of this grief journey that doesn't get talked about a lot, but I wanted to hit on it because you said it very well. That even in those moments where we don't have a supportive partner or we have this outcome happen, we still have some control in our life and we still have an option and an ability to prevent that from happening down the road and to instill those values in your own children, especially I think you said they're 12 now. Um, one's 12 and I'm guessing one's
12
9.
and 9.
12 and 9 to instill those values in them at such a young age too, as really setting them up for success. And this is going to be where you might not have gotten that in your experience, but they're going to give that to somebody else later on in life. And I think that that is such a beautiful gift and a beautiful blessing that's come out of your experience of this nature of having a miscarriage. I think that's one of the beautiful gifts that can come out of that. So.
Wow, that's just so powerful what you've just said. Like, having someone, yeah, just say that back to you about, what you're doing. And sometimes, you're doing those things, but you don't see or think about, hey, this is going to have a huge impact on the way they form relationships and support their partners in the future. And, it's mind blowing. We have such, no, I could use the word power, but I don't mean it in an overpowering way. But, we have influence, over our children to help them become the people they are. So I think, we have such, a great opportunity to shape the way that they live. And I think, yeah, you're right. My journey has led me down that path and to be able to support them in that way. And I think, everybody's journeys as they go through grief, they've all got lessons to share. And I think, in their children or even, other people in their lives, to help them try and understand and get through life, in similar or different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I can share with you the reason I was really attached to my son. I don't know why he brought smiles out at me in the hospital. It was a strange thing.
Hmm.
But he really showed me what love is. This little
Yeah.
tiny baby that was stillborn changed my world. I mean, I'm so grateful for his life. I wouldn't be doing this podcast if it wasn't for him, by the way. Um,
Yeah.
he led me down this road. And so I've learned from so many people lately too. I was talking about stillbirth grief with somebody recently that I had just met across the world, and they said, Chris, if you'd never had that stillbirth, if you'd never been there in that experience, and you never held your son the way you did, and even all the hurt that came before that, even if you hadn't experienced all that, you wouldn't be able to help people the way you are today. You wouldn't even be in these rooms with these people today doing what you do. And I wanted to share that with you today because I feel I wanted to say this to you, gonna because I feel the outpouring of love to share this with you. Had you not gone through all those miscarriages, had you not had an unsupportive relationship that are going through that, you wouldn't be making the impact you are with these women that are going through this, and these women that may have had their first miscarriage, just had a stillborn. You wouldn't be able to help them in the capacity that you are. And so there's all these experiences you've had that are just huge gifts. And we don't, and I share this a lot in my podcast episodes, but we don't always see the gifts and the lessons and the blessings right in the moment because it's very painful. There's a lot of hard emotions and
Mm.
trauma and guilt and shame. We're all going through these things just kind of like this a lot. But when the dust settles a little bit and we get some time away from that moment to really explore our grief and understand it, we start seeing those things. And that's where I think as much as those moments were hard and very challenging, I'm sure they were, and it was a rough time of life, it made you such a beautiful person that you are today, and it gave you the ability to give this gift on to your children in such a powerful way. And I think that that's I always say grief is the gateway to personal transformation. And that's what I mean by it is
Mm.
we take these rough experiences of life and they become a gift and we change the world with it. And who's to say what your 9 and 12-year-old will do in 10, 20 years because mom stood up and said, you don't got to be like this over here. It's okay to be this person. It's okay for you to be
Yeah,
this way. And then they're going to go on and impact other people. And it's almost like a snowball effect. So I always say that this grief journey doesn't have to be filled with negativity. It doesn't have to be filled with darkness and overwhelming emotions and all these things that we live in grief sometimes. And I've been there, by the way. So I'm not trying to preach to the choir, but I'm just saying that it doesn't have to be that dark thing. It can be such a beautiful gift when you're able to get to that healing part of your journey. It's a beautiful
definitely.
thing.
Absolutely. 100% agree. And, just you saying all that yeah, just brings up a lot of those feelings of that you have healed and where you are now, you're the person you are because of what's happened. And, and I am thankful. I am thankful that I've had those experiences because, yes, as you said, I wouldn't be who I am today without those experiences.
Well, Fiona, I wanted to ask you before we wrap up. I always like to ask a couple questions at the end here. If there's somebody that's going through a miscarriage right now, or even somebody that's just going through grief and has lost someone, could you share one or two things that was really impactful for you on your grief journey? Something that really helped you out that maybe you wish you'd heard sooner?
I think to let yourself be in that moment. I tried to shut off that grief, and I think that made it worse, or did make it worse. So, as hard as it feels, you just try and sit with it. Surround yourself with people who are supportive, and there are going to be people that just don't understand, and they're never going to understand or be supportive. But surround yourself with people that will be there for you and talk about it. Don't feel pressured to talk about it, but talk about it because, it is an experience that you have in life and it's an experience you do have for a reason. And, you know, the grief journey goes on, but try and work through it and work through it with people that are supportive, I think is the biggest lesson to take away from that.
That's beautifully said. And I appreciate you sharing that because that's something that a lot of people don't take notice of in their grief process because grief puts us in a very vulnerable state in our
Yes.
person. And it's a place where unfortunately there are times people are going to say insensitive things or hurtful things, or they're going to try to tell you how to get over your grief and try to fix you, if you will.
Yep.
Um,
100%.
And I've shared with people as I learned it. Somebody put this in words really well yesterday when I was talking to them, but they said grievers don't want to be fixed. And she said, we
Hmm.
don't want to hear that. What we do want, by the way, is to feel seen and heard and understood. That's what we want. And
Yes.
this woman I talked to, she's a beautiful lady. I'll have to get you introduced to her, but she said, "I'm a listening heart. I'm a grief coach, but I'm a listening heart." And she said, "Chris, I spend 95% of my time with my people I work with just listening. I don't talk. I listen."
Yep.
And she
That's
said
powerful.
that's what they want. And what you said about, there's going to be people that aren't going to be making you feel comfortable and safe in that process. I would recommend staying away from those people while you're trying to heal and grieve. Find those people that are supportive and listening hearts for you. I think that's a very,
Yes.
very powerful space that, not only can you heal faster, and it's not really about speed, in my opinion, but healing is about giving yourself that space, giving yourself that time, like you said, sitting with your grief, allow yourself to be there.
Yes.
It's not a scary thing. It's giving yourself permission to feel, and giving yourself
Yes.
permission to work through that. And that's the strength you can give yourself and the big gift you can give yourself, as a matter of fact, when you go through these things. Um,
Definitely.
so I wanted to ask Fiona if anyone wants to get in touch with you after listening to this podcast, where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can reach me on Facebook, so under Fiona Dunmore. You can look me up also on Instagram at Fiona Dunmore Parenting, or you can send me an email at info@fionadunmore.com.
Awesome. Well, Fiona, I just want to say this has been a pleasure to have you on my podcast today. This has been a wonderful conversation, something that definitely hits home for me, but I was so excited to talk to you about somebody who's gone through this loss multiple times and still found a light at the end of the tunnel going through that grief journey. And for you to share the lessons and your story and your outcomes that you've had, it's truly been an honor to have you as a guest today.
Thank you. It's just been amazing. And if I can share my story to help other people, that is my job. And that's what I love to do, to help and support other people.
Well, I love that. Well, everyone, today, this podcast is going to be up on YouTube and Podbean here in the next week or two. I just want to let you guys know that you can have access to all my episodes on those platforms. I'll be sharing links on my social media so you guys can reach out to Fiona if you guys have questions or want to get in touch with her. And other than that, I want to thank everybody for joining me on another episode of the Empower Grief Journey. And we'll be back with another episode next week. Thanks for listening.